I love teaching yoga, but there are times when that's the last thing I feel like doing. How do I make my students feel great when I feel like shit? It's happened many times, and I'll share how I've managed it, got through it, and what I've learned from it. So let's get started. Welcome to the Youthful Older Yogi podcast. I'm MJ Waddell, your yogi host and founder of Share Yoga. I've been practicing, teaching, and loving yoga for over 25 years. I'm an advocate of movement, creativity, and staying healthy in mind and body after 50. And so are my guests. It's never too late to start, and there's a lot of healthy years ahead. So let's start now. Hi, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Youthful Older Yogi. I'm MJ Waddell, creator and founder of Share Yoga, and your host of the podcast, The Youthful Older Yogi. I was contemplating on what the topic should be this week, and it's less than a week since our general election, and I thought about teaching during distressful times, teaching during turmoil. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I've written out what I want to say so I don't jump all over the place. So I hope this helps. And again, thank you for tuning in. I'd love any comments or suggestions or reflections after I talk about today. And it doesn't mean just teaching during turmoil for a yoga teacher, but for anyone that has to go back to the workplace, or they could be teaching anything at all. So this applies to almost everyone. Teaching during turmoil. When I teach yoga, I often say yoga is a feeling and a breathing practice. You breathe, move, and sense your body's response in poses that offer strength, flexibility, stability, and so much more. I prefer teaching when my life is running smoothly. You know, my bills are paid, I'm healthy, my future seems bright. Unfortunately, I've had to teach during some extremely intense personal turmoil. That's what I wanted to talk about on the podcast today. How do you teach yoga when you feel like shit? You feel your life sucks and you are miles away from the yoga philosophies. I've had experience with this. I'd like to share how I managed it, how I got through it, and what I've learned from it. Let's start in 2010. My marriage abruptly and unexpectedly ended. I had been teaching yoga for about 4 years at several gyms and studios, as well as navigating my professional career on stage. This event brought me to my knees. I left my home, my jobs, and my marriage and went back to my childhood home where I grew up. 3 weeks later, I started teaching yoga at a new studio. I'm still not sure how I did it. It was necessary from a financial perspective that I have some income, and I was camping out on an aerobed in my sister's basement. I taught every class I was offered, even though teaching yoga was the last thing I wanted to do. I can confess to you that I was drinking every night, and not just a glass. Teaching hot vinyasa flow, I bargained with myself that students wouldn't be able to tell I was hungover. I could adjust the lighting to be very low. My tears blended in with the sweat. I avoided demonstrating any poses. I walked around the room, recited the script, and made sure during Shavasana I kept my eyes open, stood at the back of the room, and was grateful I had had an hour of distraction before feeling my heart break the rest of the day. This went on for months. Let me just say, I do not recommend teaching with a hangover. I do not recommend teaching in an altered state. And I do not recommend teaching when time is needed for your own healing. Eventually, my emotional state improved, my heart hurt less, and I didn't feel like a yoga fraud. So how do we teach when we have emotional or physical pain, or there's been a local or national or a world disaster. Here's a few ways I've learned what works and what doesn't work. And there are no absolutes, no do's, absolute do's or don'ts. This is just my personal experience. So let's start with personal struggles. I don't share. I'm sure my students didn't come to class to hear my troubles. They have their own. That doesn't mean you can't plan your class around what you're struggling with. For example, if you've had a disappointment, you could theme your class around hope. Perhaps start with a quote about optimism or the power to persevere. In your poses, you could encourage your students to stay one more breath, perhaps in a challenging yoga pose, a balance pose. Most times when I teach a group class, it's from my own practice and what I'm working on. I don't know what the students need or what they may be struggling with. I do know the practice will help them turn inward and find alignment of body and mind. Now, let me address our recent general election. We live in a divided country, and what I consider a tumultuous time. Yoga is a Sanskrit word that translates to join, to merge, to yoke, to unite. Regardless of political beliefs, my job as a yoga teacher is to guide the students to create union between body, mind, and spirit. I never bring in my personal convictions or beliefs, and I'm doing my best to avoid commenting on how I feel about the outcome. Without a doubt, this is far from easy. I'd like to think everyone thinks the same way I do, and all practicing yogis are united in beliefs. This simply just is not true. Just as divorce separates and alienates us from our family members, neighbors, co-workers, and former friends, this political climate seems to be doing the same. I'm deciding to be a present listener to my own mental health needs first, and listening to my intuition and knowing from previous experience how to pause before I react to a comment I may not agree with. I try to take the mindset of being neutral as I'm teaching and hold space and grace for everyone, no matter their beliefs. Just practice the breath and share the breath practice with my classes. I wanted to pop in to thank you for listening to The Youthful Older Yogi. It's season 2, and I'm so excited to bring you more great guests, education, and ways for you to stay youthful in mind and body after 50. If you love the show and want to help me make it even better, please consider becoming a supporter. You get to choose how much and how often you give, and there's no commitment. And remember, I donate a portion of every dollar I receive to charity. For 2024, I've chosen UNICEF. Just click the support button in the show notes. And just as helpful is sharing the show with other youthful older yogis. Thank you again so much for listening. And now let's get back to the podcast. I remember during my divorce, I felt breathless, and not in a good way. Even in yoga, the yoga world, there are different beliefs, opinions, and disagreements. The practice reveals so much about ourselves, and we can take its teachings and its mindful philosophies off the mat and use them as they apply to us. Next, I wanted to talk about teaching when you're injured or in a state of active healing. Ahimsa is paramount. This fundamental principle invites us to do no harm and cultivate compassion and love for ourselves and others. When I started practicing, I was what I called a pusher, meaning I would push myself in poses sometimes too far beyond my edge. And I learned this type of body competition as a dancer. It was a form of self-imposed suffering. Do more, be better. In my practice today, I remind myself to do less to feel better. I'm navigating in a body that has been in constant, challenging, creative, and expressive movement since I was able to walk. And at nearly 65, I feel so fortunate that I'm still teaching and practicing. But there are significant changes in my hips. I feel the opposite of flexible, and there is pain in some poses. When I teach, I do share that I'm in tune to what my body is telling me. I avoid saying, I've got bad hips. They're not bad. They're sensitive right now. And they've experienced a lot of high kicks, running, jumping, and dancing. In my younger years, I wouldn't share any physical pain. No pain, no gain. You know it. I remember dancing with a sprained ankle in a college performance. It caused additional harm. Today, I share my limitations, not my pain. When teaching with an injury or limitation, it's an opportunity to practice Ahimsa. Don't do any pose that hurts. It's that simple. Now, I do not recommend teaching with a serious injury. I do not recommend teaching against doctor's orders. And I do not recommend teaching when time is needed for your own healing. And lastly, I want to talk about teaching during the pandemic. As we all know, in-person teaching ceased. We all had to learn how to connect virtually. We all had to be sensitive to a global situation filled with fear and uncertainty. People were dying. People we know. Businesses died. Maybe your own yoga studio closed its doors permanently. Our country was divided then, too. As yoga teaches, everything is impermanent and nothing lasts. Impermanence is a painful fact of life we have to accept and work with. A pandemic, a divorce, an injury, even a belief will occur and then come to an end. Speaking for myself, my experience with teaching yoga through tough times fills me with confidence that I can get through the next tough time, because there will be more. And I feel like that tough time is here now. There's no roadmap in life. We do the best we can to choose the right road. And I've taken many wrong detours and suspect there'll be more. I remind myself that life, like yoga, is a feeling and breathing practice. Feel deeply, breathe deeply. I do recommend you teach and practice with that in mind. And I do recommend you practice Ahimsa, non-harming. And I do recommend taking time for your own healing when you need it. Remember, yoga means to bring together, to join, and to unite. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And until the next time, keep sharing yoga. Namaste.
Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your comments, all likes, and all shares. Please subscribe to my website, shareyogawithmj.com, so you can receive my newsletter and be first to take advantage of my courses and freebies. If you navigate on social media, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Mary Jane Waddell. That's Jane with a Y, Jayne. This podcast would not be possible without the help of my editor, Dan Jones, from Cocoa Beach Productions. You can find Dan at cocoabeachweb.com. And of course, thanks to my generous guests who share their time, insights, and youthful wisdom. Remember, the Youthful Older Yogi podcast is presented solely for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for a physician or other qualified professionals. Okay, yogis, stay well, stay youthful, and keep sharing yoga.